Hello and good evening and good morning to Ross. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being on the show. I said hello, good morning and good evening because we are beaming through the modern technology allows us to beam all the way to Australia. Tell us where you're at the moment, Ross.
Well, technically, I'm in the future, I guess. Everything's fine and dandy over here. I'm actually now based up in Queensland. So I made the move from New South Wales, Sydney, which most people are familiar with.
Sure.
I'm a bit closer to Brisbane for those that know their geography.
Very nice. I think I said when we first spoke that I went on honeymoon to Australia and ended up in not too far from where you are actually. So that's a whole different podcast.
Well to leave because a lot of people come this way and never make it back, Dan.
Yeah.
So fair play to you.
So Ross, we're going to talk all things public sector network, the business that you co-founded and you're currently CEO of. Tell us, for those that aren't aware, a bit about the business, what it does, who it serves, and how it serves that community, please.
Yeah, perfect. Well, as you can probably tell by the name, Public Sector Network, we didn't invest too much time thinking about the name of the company. It's one of those, Ronseal does exactly what it says on the tin jobs. It's a network of public servants, Dan. And really the premise is quite simple. Government everywhere are typically faced with very similar challenges, whether that be federal, state, local, or central in the UK, all facing the same types of problems and challenges. And so really what we try to do as a network is to help government executives to connect themselves with their peers, to benchmark, how's their current projects, programs, priorities shaping up, and ultimately drive towards best practice. What does great look like and how can we learn from each other? We're big believers. There's some very smart people inside of government, but one of the big challenges is really knowing who's already done or is doing similar work to you. And so we try and connect them via a whole bunch of different mediums, events being one of those.
Sure, thank you. So it's events. I know you have a learning platform as well. There's a community, which we're going to get on and talk about. Give us a sense of the scale and the size of the business, and then we're going to go sort of back to the beginning and talk about how you got there. As it is today, how many staff, how many people do you reach with, how many territories, and so on?
Yeah, great question. So we've been operating for, I think we're coming into our 10th year now, so nearly a decade. I've aged dreadfully over that period of time. Anyone that says that running a business is easy is a stone-faced liar. So it's been 10 years. We now operate in four going on 5 countries. We've globally got about 140 full-time employees, which is a scary number when I think about where we were, with me and my business partner sat around a dining table no less than 10 years ago, and probably sort of turning over somewhere in the region of 10 to 12 million USD on a good year.
Fantastic. So Ross, always interested with my guests to sort of roll back to the beginning. When we spoke, when we met originally, you were talking to me about you're an Essex boy. For those people that can't,
I don't hold it against me, Dan, but yes, you are very right in saying so.
Talk to me about. I'm always interested to know where that sort of entrepreneurial spirit came from. Talk to me about your upbringing in Essex, in the UK.
Yeah,
I know also you qualified as a lawyer, I believe.
I did, yes. My father was very disappointed when I switched law for the heady heights of event salesmanship. So that's an entirely different story.
So tell us about that and sort of what aspects of your early life and career shaped your entrepreneurial spirit and ultimately the decision to launch your own business with Public Sector Network.
Yeah, great question. Again, I mean, I think, everyone in Essex fancies themselves as a bit of a wheeler dealer. So that's probably not too far from where it all began. I don't think there was one particular moment or anything that sort of shaped that. But I've always been really interested in people, in business, in commerce and that kind of stuff. And probably, despite being a relatively bright lad, didn't really do too well at following orders or instructions. Probably got bored a bit quick. So I like to sort of make the rules up as I went along. All of that probably led to me, eventually wanting to start my own thing and seeing if I could lead from the front. But no different upbringing to anyone else, I think. Very lucky, 2 very loving parents, albeit divorced. One was a nurse, one was a policeman. So, brought up with good manners and an understanding of the price of a pound. Yeah, went to school, very active in sports, love of music, used to DJ. So normal stuff, I think, and just kind of ended up falling into, people joke about falling into sales and falling into events. I managed to fall into both. I was an event salesperson, so I really hit the unlucky lottery there with that one to pick up both of those afflictions, as people joke about. And that was it. And, did that for many, many years in the UK before making the transition over to Australia, where again, worked with a company for 5-6 years before deciding to start Public Sector Network.
Sure, thank you. And let's talk about the transition from being a qualified lawyer to event sales. Tell me about that. How did that come about? Was that an intentional thing, or was it sort of a serendipitous meeting or moment with somebody that convinced you?
Probably a combination of the two things. I had to go on and do the bar to become fully qualified. It's worth noting. My lawyer friends won't let me get away with that one. But that was the logical next step after qualifying and sort of graduating from university. I think the problem was, Dan, when I got to the end of the law degree, I realised I didn't really like law that much. There was parts of it I enjoyed. I enjoyed talking to people. I enjoyed arguing with people. I enjoyed building cases. But there was a lot of research and books and a lot of that kind of stuff, which perhaps didn't interest me as much as I thought it might. And to be candid with you, I didn't really have a plan. Friend of mine, very good friend of mine, Carl, went to a grad fair, ended up speaking with IQPC, who many people will know and have been through that business. A great business, want to stress that, and got offered a job. They were so taken with him, they asked him, do you have any more people like you? And he said, I've got 3, actually. So all 4 of us started on the same day, at the same time, in the same company. And 2 of us are still working together now.
That's amazing. And you said it quite matter of fact that then you moved to Australia. Tell me about that and why the decision to sort of move all the way across the world.
Yeah, it sounds very matter of fact now, hindsight being a wonderful thing. But at the time, it was obviously a very, very big decision. I think I made the mistake when I eventually left IQPC. I'd hit a bit of a glass ceiling there. So it wasn't that I'd fallen out of love with the business. I just kind of reached a bit of a glass ceiling in the London office. And I had a fantastic job offer to go work with IMG, who many people might recognise, sports, media, hospitality. So I went over there. But on the way out, I made the mistake of telling the global sales director at the time, if a job ever comes up in New York or Sydney, feel free to give me a call. Fast forward 18 months and I got a phone call saying, how quickly can you move to Sydney then? So that was kind of me on the hook for that one. And it was a short courtship and I was back in the business in Australia a few months later.
So it's quite interesting because you spoke about your sort of upbringing. You used the words that possibly weren't very good with authority. You spoke about...
Probably caveat that by saying slightly that I wasn't like a runaway, tearaway child. My dad was a copper. I just seem to think I knew best, Dan, as most teenagers do.
No, sure. And then obviously you spoke about potentially not wanting to be a lawyer because of all the research and things that you had to go through. So I'm just sort of picking up a thread. And then obviously you made the move to Australia. And I'm just trying to tie those threads together. And that from lots of people I speak to and read about and other podcasts that we all listen to, that seems like those are the sort of character traits of an entrepreneur sort of building there, ready to take risks from a personal perspective as well. We did say it was a bit matter of fact, you jumped to Australia, but lots of other people wouldn't do that, right? You left something behind, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm just, would you agree with that? Was showing you.
No, I think there's definitely an inherent nature I have to perhaps sort of look on the positive side of things and think, what might be as opposed to, what if. So I'd always rather have a go and then know whether or not it worked or not than not try, if that makes sense. And so that's always been my nature. And that probably was the way I looked at the business in fairness. I had a very clear idea of what I wanted it to do and be. And it felt like the right time again for me. I'd sort of reached a bit of a glass ceiling again. I was at that kind of age where I had a bit of disposable income. I wasn't sort of tied down by kids or anything like that at the time. So I was kind of like, well, if I'm going to do it, now's the time to do it. And look, if it fails and it takes me 18 months to realize I was wrong, I can very comfortably walk back into another job and sort of pick up from there.
Okay. And what age were you when you moved to Australia?
I was mid-20s.
Right.
Mid-20s.
And what year was
the good old days.
What year was that?
That would have been 2010, 2011, something like that.
So
3
or 4 years.
Maybe a bit earlier. there. It could have been late 20s. I apologise.
Right.
Yeah.
So 3 or 4 years before you
Yeah.
co-founded Public Sector Network. Talk to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk to me about the journey over the 3 years before, when you first landed in Australia to where you got the idea and how you set about founding Public Sector Network.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think I could have started a business for the first 3, 4 years I was here. I was having too much bloody fun, to be candid with you. It's an incredible place for those that
Yeah.
haven't been. So it was obviously about acclimatizing, understanding the market. I had a massive job on my hands, initially rebuilding the delegate sales team and then taking over the sponsorship side of the business as well. So again, that was all good fun, and I learned a lot. I just kind of felt I'd reached a point where, as I said, the kind of stars had aligned a bit. The organisation I was with, which again was IQPC at that time, didn't really have a big focus on government at the time. So I felt it was a market that we were perhaps missing.
Sure.
They were doing a lot of work in things like mining and the financial sector and retail and that kind of thing. And look, again, maybe it's just where I was at the time. I couldn't get that excited about helping the banks make more money or the mining companies dig stuff out of the ground quicker or retail sell more fast fashion. The thing that did interest me was, how do we help government deliver better healthcare? How do we improve social outcomes for people? How do we, invest in education to build the next future leaders? How do we make sure that we build in accessibility into sort of digital services? And, how do we make sure we're secure as a country, whether that be, the borders or online and so on. So they were the sort of things I was interested in. Now, if you fast forward 10 years, all that stuff sounds really bloody obvious now because everyone's sort of talking about it.
Yeah.
But that point, it maybe wasn't so.
And there would have been a moment where you took that decision in your mind to, reject, I guess, the comfort of a monthly paycheck and go for it. Tell me about that moment and how that sort of manifested itself into actually starting the business.
Yeah, again, you talk about just moments in time. I had already committed many, many years ago that I was going to go to the Brazil World Cup. I'm a big, big football fan. And when the Brazil World Cup was announced, many, many years before, I sort of said, I'm 100% going to that tournament. That's one I don't want to miss. And so I'd already sort of committed in my mind to take a month or so to go to Brazil anyway. So this all kind of lined up at the same time. So it seemed like a really good opportunity to break from the old company, go away, do the World Cup, come back, and then think about what I wanted to do next. And again, I thought this was maybe something I wanted to do, but there was still a lot of things to figure out at that time. Most of which was, again, am I doing this on my own? Am I doing it with somebody else? How does all that work? So there's still a lot of moving parts. What I did do a brilliant job of, Dan, was burning through lots of my savings in Brazil. So there was a real burning platform by the time I came back to get going, which is great advice for any aspiring entrepreneur. Basically, spend all your savings and it will really light a fire underneath you.
And that was Rio 2014, I think you're referring to. So
yeah, correct.
The story on the website and that you've told me is that you started the business with just 2 people and a dining table. I'm not going to ask you about.
I might have been lying. I'm not even sure we had a dining table at the time, Dan. It might have been a coffee table. I might have embellished somewhat there.
I was going to say, yeah. Talk to me about the early challenges that you faced and sort of how you overcame them.
Yeah. Well, the origin story is quite an interesting one. So there was myself and my business partner, who I think we're going to talk about a bit today anyway, and also a friend and a colleague of mine who came on and helped us build the audience. But there was effectively 3 of us at the start. I was taking care of all the commercial side of the business. My friend was helping me get some bums on seats, and my business partner Charlie was taking care of all of the production stuff, the speakers, and all the stuff that needed to be done. There was a couple of interesting sort of things that came out of that first round, at that first event that we did. The first story is that when we were considering what event to do first, I asked Charlie, and I said, well, what's the hardest thing we could do here? What's basically the thing that you'd say would be absolutely crazy to tackle this first? And he said, well, national security, defense, anything in that space, don't touch it with a barge pole. So I said, well, why is that? He said, well, more than ever, that's brand, it's trust. If they don't know you, you've got absolutely no chance of success. So me being an absolute idiot, I said, brilliant, well, that's the one that we're going to do then. To which he replied, obviously why? And my logic was, I'd probably read Eat That Frog not that long ago. My logic was, well, let's do the biggest, hardest, ugliest one first. If we nail that one, everything after this is going to be a walk in the park. So that's what we did. We took on a really challenging event to begin with. It went really, really well up until about 4 to 6 weeks out from the event, when we realized that between the three of us, none of us actually knew how to run an event. We knew what an event was. We'd been on site for them, but none of us had a blind bit of experience on the operational or the logistical side. A very panicked phone call to employee number one who'd just been let go, which was an absolute godsend for me. And I had to sweet talk her through the door to come and salvage the absolute mess that we'd made in the lead up to this event. Anyway, the happy ending. The event went really, really well, and here we are 10 years later, laughing about that story.
Fantastic. Yeah, operations, the thrust and the engine room behind any good event.
The unsung heroes. Wouldn't be able to run an event without them. Absolutely no chance.
So that you set the business up in 2015. Talk to me about the trajectory and the timeline over the next sort of 10 years. I think when we spoke originally, you spoke about 3 phases. So let's go through that, like the startup phase to start off with, because interested, people that are listening will be on that journey. So they'll be interested in, how you dealt with all the things that go with starting a business. And as we know, it's not just the market you're serving, it's everything from, cash flow and staff and all that sort of essential ingredients that go into making up a successful business. So tell us about maybe the first phase.
Yeah, so I think that first phase was a really interesting and exciting one. It's all brand new, right? And so you're doing everything for the first time. So it's, you're learning lots of lessons as you go. I've always thought that, events as an industry has quite a low barrier to entry. And what I mean by that is, if you think about the model, typically you can start an event or a concept and you don't have to pay for that event until much closer to the date. So you've actually got an opportunity, if you give yourself enough lead time, 6, 12 months, to self-generate the funds you need to run that event. There's not many other sort of industries in the world where you can get away with that. And so I think it was interesting to use that model. It was entirely self-funded. We ate what we killed. We invested where we could. And so we obviously must have hit a nerve in a good way with the market, because it scaled quite rapidly. And I think people really bought into our narrative, which was, again, all of our services for government were effectively free and still are in the main to this point. There's a few things that aren't, but in the main, what we deliver to government is typically free of charge. We got industry to invest, and we were solving a problem for industry at the time in terms of accessing that market. And I think because we went out and said, well, all we do is government, we don't do anything else, we quite quickly built up some trust. There's lots of other companies that will service government as part of many other things that they do, or they get government to come to their events. But we were sort of putting ourselves out there and saying, well, no, we're specialists. This is all we do. And that got some traction pretty quickly. And so those first few years, to be honest with you, we were probably running more events than I care to remember. Myself and my business partner were on planes pretty much every other week, touring the country, running these sort of events that could range from 50 people to 250 people. I'm pretty confident that those first 18 months gave me my gold status with Virgin that I still enjoy to this day, because we were on a plane so often. So I think those first 18 months were quite formative for my frequent flyers points, which was great.
Extra benefit. And that was Australia only at the time.
Yeah, it was. So we did about 3-4 years of Australia only. And then again, sort of serendipitous, an ex-colleague of one of ours was as an Australian over in Canada. So you've got the Brits running the Australian office and the Australian running the North American office in PSN, which is always fun. He was looking at maybe going out and doing his own thing at the time. And again, we'd reconnected and we sort of had a chat. And I said, well, you can go out and do your own thing, or we can help you launch, PSN North America. And you can take everything we've learned, everything we've done, the brand, the website, all this kind of stuff, come in with us and we'll build it together. I'm a big believer in, well, 2 things really in that regard. One is, rather than worrying about who's got what slice of the pie, just worry about growing a much bigger pie. If you grow a bigger pie, everyone, gets fed. And I'm also a big believer in the old adage, you can, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. I think there's a lot more to be had through partnerships and collaborations and the like. And so that was an easy one for me with Andrew in North America. We said, well, let's just work together on this. And so that business got set up probably, 6, 7 years ago now. And it's really been going from strength to strength in Canada initially, and certainly in the last 2.5 years in America as well, which is obviously an entirely different beast in its own right, the US market.
Yeah. So interesting, you decided to partner with somebody that knows that market rather than go there yourself and try and establish your own route. We'll come back to that in a minute. I want to talk about how you built a relationship with the community that you serve. Because again, yes, there are low barriers to entry to putting on an event, but you still got to get people to there or to the event. Talk to me about that relationship with the community, maybe in those early days, how you started to build up some, kudos within it, and how that sort of has evolved over the last 10 years to sort of keep them connected to what you do.
Yeah, again, I don't know if there's any secret sauce here, but then again, everything in hindsight seems obvious. So maybe it is. I mean, we focused on a couple of things. One was, as I said, being specialists. So we didn't want to be all things to all men or women. We wanted to really say, well, put a stake in the ground and say, we work with government and we believe in this sector and we're invested in the sector and we want to work with you. So I think that helped stand us apart from perhaps some more generic, events or conference providers. I think we really, really, really focused, and I think this is still true to this day, really focused on massively over delivering on the quality side compared to the cost side.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make sure people were getting huge value from what they do with us. And it was really always about having, the best topics, the best speakers, really giving people something that they looked at and was like, wow, I have to be at this event. And oh my God, it's free. I mean, this is crazy. So that was another thing. And then I guess from there ongoing, I mean, it's call it old fashioned, but it's just, staying humble, working hard, and talking to your customers. I mean, again, that our business has evolved and pivoted a few different ways, a few different times. You can't do that without talking to the customer first and understanding, well, where are they still getting value? What do they enjoy? And also asking for candid feedback. I think people are too scared sometimes to actually ask the question, what could we do better? I'm a big believer in that you can always do something better. If you can't do something better, give up and go home. You've completed the game. I mean, I think you should always be looking at what can I do next.
Sure. Thank you. And you just you mentioned there about some pivots that you made. So I want to maybe talk about some of the other phases of the business, if you like, and the growth. So after when you came out of startup, and again, I guess still sort of pre-COVID or even during COVID, talk to me about some of the pivots that you said you made, and were they intentional or they happened because of circumstance, and sort of what that meant for the business?
Yeah, there's probably two key things I think that were not necessarily pivots. They're always part of the plan, but again, things happen at different times for different reasons. I mean, one was there was always a real deliberate intention that we wanted to be a global business. The word global is doing quite a bit of heavy lifting there. It's 5 countries, but it sounds better when you say global. So we wanted to be a global business because we truly believed there was a lot of learning that could happen internationally. What's happening in Toronto that Sydney should know about? What's New Zealand doing that the UK could learn from? So that was always a very deliberate ploy from our side that we wanted to do that. And then obviously bringing Canada, the US, and then the UK online has obviously strengthened that story because that was always part of the plan. The other thing that was always deliberate but hasn't been easy, to be candid with you, is that online element, the community side of things.
Sure.
Because again, I'm a big believer that events are a fantastic moment in time for people to come together and start a sort of conversation. How do you carry that conversation on after the events ran? So we were still seeing people turn up and exchange business cards or email or things like that. Why don't we create a hub, a community where all of our delegates, all of our members can exchange ideas and collaborate and get access to the content and keep that dialogue going, within PSN. And so again, that's something we offer at no charge, but really to help them continue those conversations. And as I mentioned, connect and network with peers that they might not otherwise have a chance to meet.
Sector Network became a B Corp, I think, around 5 years ago.
Yep.
Tell me, Ross, what motivated the decision and how it's influenced your business operations and values.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think we were looking for something at the time that would kind of allow us to hold ourselves to account. We were trying to do the right things, and I'll talk about what the right things are, but we're trying to do the right things. But we were looking for a model or a framework that could kind of give us some direction and some guidance, and I guess hold us to account, as I said. So we ended up coming across the B Corp certification, which at the time probably wasn't as prominent as it is now. Certainly, it's quite US centric, but it really has expanded in Australia and the UK of late. And again, their big thing is about doing well by doing good, putting purpose alongside profit. And I think one of the things that really jumped out to me was, well, twofold really. One, we're in that public sector space, right? We're about public services, so there should be alignment from us in terms of caring and wanting to do the right thing. The second thing, which is a bit scary, that I found out, which is one of the drivers towards us being a bit more sustainable, was the events industry as a whole is up there, top three, top five, with creating the most waste and carbon in the world. And not a lot of people know that. But if you think about it logically for a second, in terms
Yeah.
of the travel, the venues, the builds, the knockdowns, the food, it becomes really obvious. Jesus, of course. So we're very big on the planet, so our thing was, well, how do we run events that are sustainable? It doesn't mean zero waste. That's very, very hard to do. But how do we just make sure that we're making choices which are congruent with the way that we view the world, and that we want to leave it in a slightly better place than we found it? And so that B Corp status was really good for us. And so, yeah, we did the first accreditation, I think 5 years ago, and we just went through our recertification. So that was good as well. And the questions they ask you, it's challenging. You have to actually think about, well, yeah, why do we do this a certain way when we should be doing it that way? And so you do have to sort of go back and rethink and unpick certain habits that you've fallen into as a business, and try and make better lifestyle decisions, for want of a better way of describing it. But it's good. I think it's really healthy. It challenges you. And our team are really bought into it. So I think it's been really good market facing for us. I think our sponsors and our government clients are learning and knowing more about it. And I think it puts us in good stead with them. But I think it's really helped us on the staff front, because, a lot of people now want to work for businesses that have a purpose or a mission and are trying to do good. And so that's been one way that we've really had some success with it, is by getting people in that do care.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you make a good point there as well, that ever more so, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, with different generations of the workforce coming in, the values that a company holds are incredibly important. Yes, money has to be right, but if you've got two companies and the pay is the same, if they've gone down the route that you've gone down, I think that makes a difference to the generation coming into the market. Interested to know a little bit more about growing internationally. What are some of the challenges that you've experienced? I mean, you mentioned the partnership in America, but talk to me about other territories that you've gone into. Again, someone else that's listening is thinking to going into another country where they see an opportunity.
Yeah.
What would your advice be?
Yeah. Do it. Go for it. I mean, you obviously have to do your due diligence and do your research. You can't just, blindly go into another country. Again, our path was somewhat facilitated by the fact we had a man on the ground over there, in our business partner, that wanted to do something similar. And so that collaboration worked. I think I'd always say you'd be surprised at how many similarities there are in the markets, but you can't overlook the sort of nuances of it, because they are unique, and it's that uniqueness that will eventually either make you succeed or fail. You need to understand what happens on the ground. We still have really great success in Canada. I'd argue probably our brand is strongest in Canada, despite the fact that we started over here. That market really, really took to us. And that might have been because Canada had a 3-4 year head start on Australia, in the sense of, we'd already laid some of the foundations that meant they could start a bit quicker. And so I think that's always really important. If you're launching into make sure you learn every lesson you can and take it with you. The US, by comparison, was harder. Very, very open about that. It's such a big country. You've got, almost 50 plus different countries within a country in terms of the states, and they're all very unique and nuanced, and what works in one might not necessarily work in the other. and it's obviously a hyper competitive market over there. So that was perhaps one of the lessons we learned, was where we'd had so much success in Canada. I think we just thought that we'd roll down into America and be welcomed with open arms.
Yeah.
Turns out wasn't the case. Bloody hard work then.
Yeah, fair enough. I want to move on to talk about your relationship with your co-founder, Charlie. You've worked together for over a decade. Again, I've had people on the show that have had co-founders, either one or two. Interesting to understand that dynamic. Talk to me about how you've maintained that strong partnership.
Yeah.
And how that works.
Yeah, well, probably two quick caveats to that. Technically, I've known Charlie for longer than 10 years because we were ex-colleagues originally, and then we went our separate ways before coming back together. So there's a good history there. We'd already worked together once before. Not for an extended period of time, by the way, maybe a couple of years, but long enough to know that I liked him, I rated him, I trusted him. So that's always a good start. There was also actually a third co-founder that started the business with us. He was the smart one that decided to stay in his job, though, and be a silent partner. So there was technically three of us at the start, but Charlie and I are the majority shareholders and business owners, and the two that kind of ran the business. I think the really important things are, Charlie is an absolute genius. He's such a brain box that, he's really the brains, and I'm the mouthpiece of the business, for want of a better way of describing it. But it was very clear to me that, it's important to understand what you're good at and what you're not good at. And, could I or he have gone and ran the business entirely on our own? Maybe, but I'm not convinced it would have been as successful, because he's so strong at what he does and I specialize in what I do. That division of skill, that division of labor really has allowed us to work on what we do best. And yeah, look, it's been a fantastic working relationship. I think he and I think I mentioned you before, we very rarely disagree. Doesn't mean we don't have different opinions on things, but we kind of always made that rule that for us to do something meaningful or a big decision, we'd have to do it in agreement. You can't run it where, someone captains calls it and says, well, I don't care what you think, I'm doing this, because it's sort of recipe for disaster. So we kind of made that commitment early on that, big decisions, we would make those together. We have to be in agreement. And if we're not in agreement, we can't do it. And so I think that's what's probably held us so tightly together through all those years, is that we've kind of been side by side making all of those decisions together, and also been really ably supported, it is important to stress, by a global leadership team that we've brought on over the last 10 years that have very much complemented our skill sets, because there are some gaps, Dan, believe it or not, between Charlie and I's skill set. There's a lot of stuff we can't do. So it's been important to have those other people in the mix.
No, sure. Thank you. It's good to hear that, it's worked for you. You do read about stories where people get into business together. They think they've got, a good mix, but it doesn't always work out.
I think there's always a risk of that. Of course there is. When you've got two people, there's always that risk. Of course there is. Again, my view's always been, I don't like my own company, so I'd much rather be working with somebody else and bouncing ideas off of someone. I get energized. I find it more fun. I'd always take that risk. I'd always prefer to work with somebody knowing there's a risk that you might have a disagreement, than doing it all myself. And, yes, I get to make every decision, but I'll probably make a lot of bad decisions if I'm left to my own devices all the time.
Sure. And I actually want to talk about your leadership journey over the last 10 years, sort of how you feel you've evolved as a leader. You've built the business with Charlie from just the two or three of you to, as you said, over 100 staff. There's no real, you can read all you like about how you do that, but you've got to go off and do it. Talk to me about how you think you've evolved as a leader over that time.
Yes, a really good question. I think you probably have to ask my team and get their candid feedback. I do genuinely often think that I was maybe a better leader when I was employed than when I'm running the business. That might sound somewhat outrageous, but I think as a people leader, when you're just focused on leading people, you can give them so much time. When you're also trying to lead a business, a strategy, everything else, you can sometimes dilute what you're doing. And it's not deliberate, of course. I'm trying to be the best leader I can, but I'm certainly finding I'm more time poor than I once would have been. I think what I've probably improved as a leader is experience. You've seen things before, you've done them before, you can kind of read the room, you understand where things are going. So I think that's probably improved over time. But again, I've been really ably supported by brilliant people leaders that have come into the business to work with their teams direct. And that's been really, really helpful. You said there about, you can't learn it from books. I try to, I'll be honest with you. I read a lot. I attend lots of courses. I listen to podcasts, obviously yourself very much included. And so I think you can always pick things up from other people. The big difference between knowing and doing is really the application of it. I mean, I think you can read about a great concept or idea in a book, but if you don't go test it, try it, action it, you don't know if it's going to work for you. And I think that's where some people get stuck with the reading or the theory,
Sure.
is not going and trying to implement it in practice. So I think you can learn a lot. You have to go use it though.
And have you not relied, maybe the wrong word, have you also lent, I guess, on mentors, like, people from outside the organization, whether it's in an official or unofficial capacity?
Yeah, look, again, I've been really lucky in my career that I've had some great managers, I've had some great leaders, I've had some great friends, very smart people, and some great customers and clients. I don't think there's anything wrong in reaching out and asking for help or asking for advice. We have now formed up an official kind of advisory board as part of PSN, which is, a few ex-colleagues and clients and ex-government and industry people that we are using in perhaps a more formal capacity than we ever did before. But absolutely, sort of, throughout my entire career, I think, not just in the last 10 years, I've always been very open to getting feedback and asking for help. I think, if you've got someone that's got more experience than you, already been through it, got the scars, I mean, why would you not ask the question and try and find out what they know?
Sure. Just want to move on to the events themselves. Events when you first set up in 2015, or when you used to run them before Public Sector Network, potentially, some people will say, and I guess it's partly true, are very different to where they are now. Expectations of both attendees and also of commercial partners are different, even more so, I guess, post-COVID. Talk to me about your view of some of the sort of trends and challenges that we're seeing in the sort of B2B event space at the moment.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think to your point, I mean, the old way of doing business pre-COVID was somewhat predictable. I mean, I think there's always been advances in terms of formats and technologies, every year within the event space, but probably up until COVID, it was a relatively stable industry. You kind of knew what worked and what didn't work. Obviously, the pandemic changed everything really quickly for lots of people, and there were some winners in that and there were some losers for different reasons. I think what that was really good for was, apart from obviously the work from home stuff and all that kind of other stuff we can get into, but was proving or reproving that there is a market for online and digital. I think the challenge that everyone went through was just there was such a surplus of digital content that supply ended up outweighing demand in the end, and perhaps there wasn't enough quality coming through. I mean, everyone was just tired of webinars, Zoom fatigue, all that usual crap. So I think when you got to post-COVID and back to, face-to-face, I think everyone returned to events, with open arms in a rush, really excited to be back face-to-face. But I think people are now a bit more balanced. I think they want both. I think they want to be able to go to a live event. I think they also want to be able to access content online. I think people are expecting hybrid, where they can do a bit of both. I think one of the biggest challenges, and I'd be interested to know if you're seeing it, so much in the UK, because that's a bit more where we're nascent, but some of the countries we're in, which are, big countries, I mean, big countries in terms of landmass, right? Australia, Canada, US, still a lot of people working from home. And so before, to get someone to go to an event, you were typically having to convince them to leave the office to go to an event. Okay? And that office was probably in the city, and the event space was probably nearby. And so the challenge was, is this event good enough to get someone to take time away from their office and their work to come to an event? The answer is yes. If you've got a good speaker lineup and some drinks at the end, most people will turn up for that. The challenge now is you're trying to convince people to leave their homes, to get out of their pajamas, to maybe take an hour's drive into the city. And so I think the expectation has risen in terms of, well, what am I actually prepared to go to now? And I think that bar's been raised. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's actually meaning that event organizers are having to think and work a lot harder for their attendees' attention.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, it's not just about content delivery anymore, because obviously what the pandemic gave us was lots of different platforms to deliver content, so people know they can get content everywhere. It's about the experience. And people throw that around,
Yep.
that experiential word around a lot, but it is. Also, it's about, genuine connections, I guess, for commercial partners. So more and more
Yep.
intentional meeting settings, appointment
Yep.
settings beforehand as well. Not so much relying on that serendipitous conversation that might happen at an event. Obviously, that's still
Yeah.
important with the networking. And coming to networking, also really important as well, which is clearly something that pandemic taught us you can't do at home. So I still think there's a flavour of the old, but yeah, blending it with some of those bits that we mentioned.
Well, if you just quickly think of it through the lens of, industry partners, sponsors, which we haven't spoken about too much today yet, and actually, I should, because our business is pretty much entirely
Sure.
funded via advertising, sponsorship, and partnerships, and without them, we literally couldn't do what we do. But the point you made there, I think, is really important. Is sponsors sponsor an event to try and get access to people that they couldn't ordinarily get access to in the wider market, right? So the event becomes a focal point, a meeting point for that industry, and so they sponsor it because rather than going and scouring the whole country and knocking on doors and picking up the phones, they know that their buyer is in one place at one time. So to your point, the more you can do at that event to make those connections happen, the more valuable it is for them. What you don't want to do is come to an event and then say, well, there's 1,000 people here. Good luck finding the
Sure.
ones that you need to talk to.
Yeah.
You haven't really solved the problem.
No, and I think, trade shows, which are much bigger than maybe some of the events that you do, maybe that typically was the format, but even those now, more and more are having hosted buyers, opportunities, or meetings that are made prior to the event. So let's talk about the commercial relationships. Obviously, you've been done very well over the last 10 years to generate the level of income that you have. Talk to me about how you went about doing that, how, we all know it's important to retain customers, some of the strategies that you employed, and also how they work with you, I guess, internationally across your different locations.
Yeah. Well, again, I don't think we do, and maybe again, it's perhaps undervaluing our own work. I don't think we do anything revolutionary again. I mean, I think if you boil it down to, what most sponsors want, when they invest in an event, it's typically one of three things. They're looking to either, raise brand awareness, they're looking to demonstrate or sort of articulate some thought leadership, stand out from the crowd, or ultimately they're looking at generating pipeline. So how do we meet people that might be interested in doing work from us? And I think most event companies know this and offer this. So again, I don't think that's necessarily particularly unique in terms of what we offer. I think the thing that is a bit different about what we do, as I said, is that again we've been really focused on really high quality at a really fair price, which not everyone in the industry does do. I don't mind saying that. I think some people chronically overcharge, over promise and under deliver. That's always been something we're very against. I don't think that should be controversial, but it seems to be. And I think the other thing is, again, because we're so laser focused on a sector, we can only help certain people. If you want to sell to the banks or sell to the, energy or mining or whatever, we can't help you. And so we're really clear about what we can do and what we can't do. And if you want to sell to government, you want to meet with government, whether that's again federal, state, local, whatever it is, we are a really good route to market for you. And I think that's obviously been built up over time, that trust, that awareness that people have come, they've had results and they've come back. And that's crucial to your point. If you want to grow a business, you have to retain customers. You can't start from zero every year. And I think the best way of doing that is, sort of walk the talk. It's very easy to say that you're going to do X, Y, and Z. Do you actually deliver it? Do you actually back it up? Do you get the people you say you're going to get?
Do you think their expectations have changed, your commercial partners, since you first started? Not necessarily in one individual company, but do you think...
Well, I saw of the industry generally.
Well, I guess the industry generally, in terms of what they want from any of the services that you provide, or maybe focus specifically on events in terms of what they feel they need or how they're presenting themselves, the opportunities that you offer, have those changed over the years?
Yeah, again, good question. I mean, I think, there's, as with probably every industry, every year that goes by, there's more and more companies in the market, right? And so I think they're probably inundated with offers and opportunities to go to events. And so it's quite hard to cut through the noise and figure out, well, which are the best ones for us to be at? Where are we going to get an ROI for our spend? So I think that's probably one challenge that they're dealing with. The challenge of government is, contracting with government is very unique, in terms of its public money, there's procurement processes, there's tenders. It's quite a complex space to be in. And so I think above and beyond just events, a lot of the work we're doing with our partners really is around research, advisory, and go-to-market stuff. So actually helping them understand, well, what does great look like in terms of how you're going to go to market? What are you going to talk about, to whom, when? Ultimately, every vendor is trying to do the same thing, right? They want to talk to the right person at the right time and deliver the right message. If you can help them do that, you're a valuable partner. If you can't,
Sure.
you're not.
Yeah. Makes sense. I think that's the way it's ever been.
Yeah.
As we sort of get towards the end of the podcast, Ross, just talk to me. It's been 10 years. You obviously built a business to, significant size. I'm sure there are many proud moments that you, your partner and your team have had. Do you have any sort of standout moments, pinch me moments at any point where you think, wow, this, when we first started, we couldn't ever have thought we'd be doing this right now?
Yeah, I mean, again, it might sound a bit cliched. I like to think I try and have those on a semi-regular basis. Maybe not daily. That might be pushing my luck, but weekly, at least, definitely monthly, where I'm very proud of the work that we've done. I mean, look, there's going to be some obvious milestones, right? I mean, running your first event, for example, when that's actually gone and done, and you look back and go, well, bloody hell, we did that. That's obviously a big moment. Taking on your first round of employees and hires, your first office space, that's always big. To your point, I mean, when you open up an international office, that's a real pinch me moment.
Sure.
Also, I think, there's milestones with events, right? We're starting to see some of our events now that are coming around for their 10th years. We're starting to run events that, when we first ran it was maybe 100 people, and now it's 1,000 people. So I think those types of things are always, you should enjoy those moments when you see progress and you see growth. But again, without sounding too negative or cliched, I always still think you can do more and do better. And perhaps that's just the way that I'm built, and I'm certain my team do hate me for it from time to time, where I don't try and linger too much in the sort of success that we've had. I'm always trying to say, well, that's great, but what could we do now?
Sure. And what about, I guess, one of the most challenging moments or hardest moments, and maybe how you overcame it? Could be, a personal or.
I think, without again sounding like Captain Obvious, I mean, I think COVID was really hard for everyone.
Sure.
I don't think anyone was sat there going, "Oh, brilliant, a pandemic, can't wait for this." So I think that was I can't say we got lucky, because it's not what I mean, but we made some pretty good decisions in that period. We pivoted really quickly. We were able to retain a lot of our staff. We actually grew quite a bit during COVID. So I think that was, again, one of those eras or periods of time where you look back and go, wow, we made some really good decisions there. So in the face of adversity, we actually sort of did really, really well. But it hasn't always been plain sailing. I can't sit here and it'd be very disingenuous if I said it's just been this, steady meteoric rise to success. Sure. We've had hard days, hard weeks, hard months. We've had moments where, it appeared as though the money had stopped coming in, or we couldn't get delegates here, or, have we overinvested or grown too quickly in the US? So there's always these constant challenges. Again, I go back to, I think it's how you look at those. Do you look at them as being finite and impossible to solve, or would you just see it as another challenge where you go, we can probably get through this, we've got through all of them so far, so this is just going to be another one that tests us, and we have to figure out what the path through it, round it, over it might be.
And on that point, I mean, how do you personally deal with moments of self-doubt? You seem like a confident chap, and obviously we spoke about the fact you like to keep going and push on. And maybe that's one way you deal with self-doubt, which is just keep putting one foot in front of another. But talk to me about that. We spoke about the ever-evolving nature of leadership and your journey. But there must be moments where you think, oh, I don't know about this or that. I know you've got a partner to lean on, but.
Yeah. I think if anyone tells you that they're confident 100% of the time and has all the answers, run. Probably in politics. I would say that I think it's different now. I mean, I think when I think about where I started in the workforce, you couldn't really, certainly in the environment I was in, which was sales, you couldn't really show weakness, self-doubt, all that kind of stuff. I think now it's much more accepted, and rightly so, to be able to put your hand up and say, hey, I'm not convinced, I don't know that, I'm unsure, I'm not feeling great here. And again, as with everyone, you have good weeks and you have bad weeks. And sometimes you make decisions that perhaps in hindsight wasn't the right decision to make. again, I just sort of try and learn my own lessons that I tell the team, which is very few mistakes are going to be finite, are going to be critical. Most things you can bounce back from. So try not to place too much weight or attachment to it. Don't try and burn the building down. But if you make a mistake, foul fast, learn, don't do it again, keep going. And I think that, I mean, to your point, I think probably one of the ways I get through it is just by staying busy as well. That might not be the right way to do it. My fiance tells me it's certainly not. But I think if you don't allow yourself too much downtime to dwell,
no,
then you just
that makes
pretty quickly it's in the rearview mirror, so you can't do anything
just
about
keep moving forward. Anyone that's listening to this, an aspiring entrepreneur, if you look back over the past decade or so, what advice would you give to them if they're thinking about going on a journey similar to yours, or they're already part way through it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to sound, again, cliched, but I'm a big fan of, I don't know if I can swear on this podcast, so I won't, Dan, but it's the old, fuck it, just do it type approach, It's give it a go. You'd be surprised at what you can achieve. The only thing I would say is, and I think I came into it eyes wide open, was don't think it's just going to be constantly falling up to success. The reality is, if you're not prepared to do some hard yards and make tough decisions, it's not as glamorous as you think. You have to be prepared to really put a shift in if you want it to be successful.
Sure.
Either that, or you're just going to be much smarter than I have, and perhaps it is easy. I don't know.
And then in terms of the future for the business, I know you pretty much, I think up to this point, you've been pretty much self-funded. Don't know if that's sort of going to change, whether you're going to consider taking on investment. Any other plans to go into other territories? Where do you think you're going to be in a few years' time? Where would you hope to?
Yeah, I think we're pretty settled with the territories. Again, the US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they were the 5 that we wanted to get to the set at the start. We're definitely spending a lot more time thinking around, as a lot of companies are, membership, subscriptions, recurring revenue. How do we do that to, give ourselves some security, but also how do we use that as a means of adding more value back to our customer base? So if we know what we're working with, how do we give more value back? Look, to your point, we're also really interested in this curate versus create model. At the moment, PSN is creating a lot of the content.
Sure.
If you look at a lot of major platforms, they curate content. So that's also something that we're keen on. But a lot of that, to your point, is probably going to require some investment at some point. It's not that we've been anti-investment to this point. It's just, I think we've been moving so quickly and we've been able to grow at a rate that we're comfortable with the money that's been coming through the door. But sometimes if you want to go take on that next big adventure or challenge, maybe you do need to consider that. And so, again, we're not interested in dumb money. I think if anyone was to come in, we'd want to make sure they're a good fit for our ethos. We are a B Corp, which means we're very big on putting purpose alongside profit. We're not just about making as much money as quickly as we can. We want to make sure if we're doing it in a sustainable way. We're big believers you can do well by doing good. So I think whoever came into the business would need to be on that journey with us. Otherwise, it just wouldn't work.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you so much. I'm sure we could have gone on for a lot longer. Maybe we'll have a part 2 at some point. We wish you the very best for the future, and also to looking forward to seeing where else you pop up across the world with some of your events. So thank you for your time today.
Brilliant. Loved it. Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me.